people from all over America had come to see Prabhupada. There was like many initiations at that time. So they were sitting there, and Prabhupada started describing the life membership program. And he said, we have introduced this life membership program in India, in America as well. And in India, it's 1,111 rupees. And when they become a member, we give them an entire set of books. He says, and so this is a very good business. And then Prabhupada started, each time saying this, started to laugh. And each time he said this, he laughed more and more. And I noticed the devotees weren't all quite getting his humor, or knowing what was going on. A lot of the devotees were young, they had no idea of business, or some did. And Prabhupada was saying, so we give them 500 rupees of books, and we take 1,000 rupees. Very good business. And then Prabhupada laughed again. He's like exploded in laughter. Very good business. And then Prabhupada says, and they invite us to in their homes, and they feed us a feast. They give us 1,000 rupees, and we give them 500 rupees of books. He said, in this way, we are eating our way back to Godhead. Very good business. Prabhupada laughed. And then everyone cracked up. So that was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada, this meeting of seeing his enormous humor, his wit, how he would teach with his humor, and his precise intelligence, and how he was not a businessman, but he had this highly developed side of him as a manager and an organizer. He told that story about intelligence and how his godbrothers didn't want to give the credit. And so the story is about Columbus, that they said actually it was an accident that Columbus discovered America. He never intended to do it. Have you heard this story? So the other people in Spain were complaining that he shouldn't become, like royalty and glorified. That he really hadn't even intended to go there. It was actually Americus who had gone there, and this and this and this. Every way they were trying to discredit Columbus. He was brought before the Queen, and they were all there debating. So Columbus said, actually, it wasn't an accident. He says, so there was a challenge. So Columbus said, I pose a challenge. No, actually the Queen posed the challenge. He said, let it be decided, I will pose a challenge. And who can answer this challenge, they should get the credit. So she said, here is an egg, and without any extraneous devices, make the egg stand on end. So, everyone was trying to think about different ways, and somehow or other they were trying to get this egg stand on end. And Columbus was sitting there waiting for everyone to finish. So he says, now may I have my turn? And he went and boiled the egg. He tapped it on its end and stood it up. Everyone, of course, protested. But the Queen understood that Columbus was an intelligent man. And so he got the credit. So this story, of course, was told primarily by Prabhupada about his godbrothers being envious of him and not wanting him to really have the credit of spreading Krishna consciousness, like even now. People are saying, it was really Lord Chaitanya. Even, it's really audacious to say this. So impersonal. Although Prabhupada said this, whenever anything would happen, he would say it so humbly and meekly. It is all the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. It is all the kindness of my spiritual master. You are all simply the disciples of my spiritual master. Prabhupada would say that. And you'd know this person really has not one drop of false ego. But he knew who he was. It's amazing how this could be. It's almost impossible from any position other than pure devotional service to understand how someone could understand this. He was asked, have you ever seen Krishna? And he says, I always see Krishna in front of me. One time they asked, this boy was asking, do you see God? And Prabhupada waited, because he was challenging for Prabhupada, but didn't answer. This was in public at a pandal. It says, do you see God? And so Prabhupada hesitated a second time. And Prabhupada said, yes. So Prabhupada understands his position. It's hard to describe, hard for us to estimate how he sees that everything is not done because of him, but when he's acting, he's the master, the art of his trade. He's the master of teaching Krishna consciousness. He knows precisely what he's doing. But he's very humble. Because he knows that somehow it's just somehow or other to him, he says somehow or other, he has the mercy of his spiritual master. He liked him. My spiritual master liked me. That's Prabhupada's acknowledgement of his powers. My spiritual master liked me. I listened to his words very carefully. He took them very seriously. So that's his acknowledgement of how, somehow or other, miraculously, he's giving this credit. Giriraj and I both were talking to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was also speaking about the different kendras and kala mandirs, these big halls in Delhi. They were like performance halls, cultural halls. There was a lot of them in Delhi. And as we were walking, we were just passing these one hall after the other, because our center was in the center of Delhi, and that's where all these halls were. And Prabhupada was saying how to organize and have programs there. And Giriraj asked Prabhupada a question. It was kind of a double conversation of how do we figure out how to spread this movement progressively. Prabhupada said, simply it takes intelligent organization. Again, a Prabhupada sutra, a mantra. Very simply it takes intelligent organization. So we can take that clue from Srila Prabhupada, that if we become serious in our hearts that we really want to see Lord Chaitanya's mission manifested, that as soon as possible, to its fullest degree, if we want to be some sort of facilitator for that and help, then we should intelligently organize. On different occasions, I've been in the room with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada talked about change. In general, he says that is your whole disease, that you want to change everything. He talked about how they changed things in Los Angeles, how they had taken down the glass windows, and he didn't want that. And Prabhupada would constantly give instructions, and devotees would change them. At the same time, there were things that Prabhupada wanted changed. So it's a matter of understanding more completely that he did ask people, say, as the editors, to change his words. One that kept coming up quite a few times, and it took him a long time to change it, in the Gita, for instance, was that they kept on, instead of Krishi Gorakshika Vanajam, they had Harigriva had put it, Prabhupada once joked, Bhagavad-gita as it is not. That Harigriva had compiled Bhagavad-gita as it is not. So there were many mistakes in the revised edition that needed correcting. And one was the cattle raising. And Prabhupada, sometimes he'd get angry about it, because it would annoy him that they would use such a term. He says, I've said before, cow protection, why have you not changed it? So there were things that he would instruct and change, and you weren't supposed to change that. And he also gave instructions on who should change it and review things. But in general, it was the overall disease. So one shouldn't take that and abuse it in terms of those who were authorized to make changes, and those who were even authorized, they should make it appropriate. But overall, it's better safe than sorry. If something was like that, don't change it. Like kirtan. Although I was not present for this particular incident, I was present for those other incidents in kirtans. And for instance, in the beginning, Prabhupada would do kirtan, and at the end of chanting Hare Krishna, he would just stop. And then they started introducing the Hari Bol from the Gaudiya Math. And Prabhupada said, what is this Hari Bol? Do Hari Bol. Or the Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Prabhupada said, which Gurudev? And I heard him tangentially say this, but wasn't at a kirtan when he said it. But I know devotees who were very careful in what they repeated. One of Prabhupada's pet peeves was, Prabhupada said. He said, who said? Prabhupada said. And with Rameshwar related it to me, and it's also in the recorded conversation. Prabhupada says, that is your problem. You're always saying, Prabhupada said, stop this. It became a real problem. Who said Prabhupada said? When did I say? I never said. In one of the letters I received from Prabhupada was another instruction. It's typical of how Prabhupada gave instructions. He said, now strain your brain to think of ways to, more and more ways. Now strain your brain to think of more and more ways to introduce my books to the intelligent class of men. And just the way Prabhupada would deal, just talking about letters. And then I'll talk about family. So talking about letters, Prabhupada was dealing with me simply by letters. I was alone in Delhi, really alone. No one would stay, and in the beginning there was no one even coming there except to make trouble. And I had to endure all of that. And I was always in anxiety. That's a whole other thing about anxiety and Krishna consciousness. So I was writing to Prabhupada and giving him reports, and he always wanted me to write to him. He said, I always want to hear from you, and it was very encouraging. And I had made 10 members of parliament into life members. And Prabhupada writes back, you have opened up a whole new history in Krishna consciousness. He's like, wow, I just made 10 members of parliament to life members, you know. But Prabhupada writes, you have opened up a whole new chapter in the history of Krishna consciousness movement. I mean, it's like, this was earth-shattering news. Like, you know, Prabhupada's gone to the spiritual world. They just made 10 life members. I mean, this is the way he wrote it. You know, you could actually see here. I said, wait a minute, Prabhupada, I only made 10, you know. Prabhupada, I made 10 life members. I don't even need to tell you that. I don't want to hear it. But at the same time, you know, Prabhupada was so sweet and encouraging. And actually, he felt that. We had such a good time planning and scheming about members of parliament, and it was becoming amazing what was going on, you know, by Prabhupada's mercy. And the biggest members of parliament, the hardest to crack, were people who were, you know, even Mayavadis. They were inviting Prabhupada, and Kamalapatri Patti, who was next to Indira Gandhi in the Congress party, most respected. He was called Pandaji. He invited Prabhupada to his house, had a public program where he invited all the ministers and top members of parliament to his house. I mean, this was like, and Prabhupada was like on fire going to that program, talking about Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami. So then I wrote another letter to Prabhupada that it was really an anxiety. Something else had happened, someone else came, and that didn't help it. And you know, the people who I asked to help abandoned me. The people would stay there 3 weeks, and then they'd run away, so I would train someone, and that was very disheartening. My wife would argue and run away. So I wrote another letter, and then Prabhupada's reply was about that. He said, actually, we are not after making members, we're not after collections, we're not after selling these books, we're not after any of these things. These are just different ways to engage the devotees in service to Krishna and thus become Krishna conscious. He says, so you need not worry. Do not be in anxiety. But 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Srila Prabhupada increasing my responsibilities by 5-fold, where he told me make members of parliament and this and this. So it's hard to understand that relationship. And then things kept on getting more and more anxious. There were so many responsibilities. I had been out 45 days without making a member. So I was in a lot of anxiety, and Prabhupada came. And I was thinking about this. Why am I in anxiety? And I was trying to follow Prabhupada's instructions of being detached, just thinking I'm a servant of Krishna. And whatever I get, Krishna comes. But every day I'd still be faced with the reality. There were devotees in Vrindavan, and if I didn't send money, they'd starve. And there were devotees in Delhi, and I had to take care of them. And, you know, Prabhupada put me under very stringent controls. I had to give 50% of life membership to BBT and 50% to construction. You don't have to be more than in second grade, 100 minus 50 is 50, and 50 minus 50 is 0, so I had a sum of 0 for maintenance. And I was the maintainer, the little maintainer of Vrindavan and Delhi. So I had no way, in terms of ordinary way, of getting maintenance. So it was quite an anxious thing. And there were always problems and more things to do. No prasadam. Everyone ate my prasadam. I was sick, and people went against me, and there were revolutions. So it was a lot of anxiety. So I went to Srila Prabhupada. He was taking his massage, which he would do every afternoon, very leisurely. Despite that he had so many things to do, he was very leisurely about everything he did. So I went to him, and I was just sitting there for a while. It took an hour for his massage, and I sat there for a while. So I told Srila Prabhupada, in my mind, I have a worry about something. I'm worried that I'm not progressing in my spiritual life correctly. Because it says in Bhagavad-gita, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma na sochati na kankshati. That when one goes to the Brahma Bhuta platform, or is in Krishna consciousness, that anxiety and lamentation are gone. I said, so I'm not concerned in terms of what I'm getting, but I'm just always in anxiety. And I'm concerned that I'm making an error in my spiritual life, and that's causing the anxiety. So, Srila Prabhupada, please correct me. This was Prabhupada's reply. It's so amazing. You want to take an amazing incident. Prabhupada looked at me. He was looking at me so softly and kindly. He says, no. He says, your anxiety is all about pleasing Krishna. Then he said, and Mother Yasoda, you see, she is always in anxiety. That this demon Trinavarta might steal Krishna, or that Krishna might be hungry. Mother Yasoda is always in anxiety. He says, so like that, all your anxieties are simply in relationship to pleasing Krishna. So they are transcendental. So kind, huh? This is Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada departed from Vrindavan on November 14th, 1977. This was approximately November 8th or November 10th. So I came to Vrindavan. I was in the Hyderabad farm, which was very important to Srila Prabhupada, so I was staying there. But I heard that Srila Prabhupada was not feeling well and that it was a chance he might leave the world, so I went to see him. And came there, and I tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, not to disrupt the mood. The room was packed with devotees. Everyone was very quiet, and I could see Prabhupada's condition. I was told about it. He really hadn't eaten for almost 6 months. It's a very important thing to understand Prabhupada's condition. He was lying in bed, emaciated, weighing maybe 70 pounds, if that much, drinking 1 spoon, 2 spoons of water, maybe eating a little bit. And as I was sitting there in the back, just listening to what was going on, and there was some kirtan. Kirtananda had come in and was offering Srila Prabhupada some strawberries, probably from New Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada asked, when Kirtananda offered him the strawberries, he says, what is the value of strawberries? And everyone was silent. And no one knew what to say. So then several devotees kept on poking me. I'm kind of known as the walking encyclopedia. I like to study things. So they kept on poking me to say something. So I didn't want to intrude on Prabhupada. I was remaining quiet. But I spoke. I said, Srila Prabhupada, the value of strawberries is that they're very high in fructose, and that provides immediate energy. Because I knew Prabhupada wasn't so much into vitamins. So I talked about the value. Prabhupada's very pragmatic. Even lying on his departure bed, not eating, he's concerned what will be the value of eating it. Pragmatic person. So the devotee next to him says, Tejiyas says that it, and he repeated it. And Prabhupada said, oh, Tejiyas is here. And Prabhupada said, how is the Hyderabad farm? So he's so cognizant, always. I mean, even this state. And so I gave him a report that we're growing corn, rice, mung beans, like that. And as soon as I said corn, Prabhupada said, oh. He says, corn. You can grind the corn, and then there are big pieces, which you can boil with water, cook with water, like rice, which is called bhat. And the other, the fine powder, you make that together like a roti, and you cook that on the pan, the cooking pan. And he says, and the villagers, they very much like this. So here he was, from a physical point of view, starving. And what was he thinking? He was just thinking how we could make this corn in the most delicious way to make the villagers happy when they take prasadam. This is a person of unlimited compassion. Je anilo premadana karuna prachu